All right, so good morning, good afternoon. Welcome in across Canada, the US, and beyond for another exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. My name is Jesse, and I know we've got a lot of new faces in the crowd today. So if you are new to us, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And everything we do goes to our YouTube channel. You can watch this live here, like a bunch of you already are. You can watch us 3 weeks next Tuesday, or 10 years down the road if you want to go back in nostalgia time and see a cool presentation again. It will all be there for you. Now, today is the beginning of what is an epic Oceans Week celebration for us. Oceans Week is classically our biggest program series of the year. We've got 21 broadcasts this week with amazing scientists and explorers around the entire planet. And specifically, today's program right now that we're joining in on is the first of an epic little 4-part series in conjunction with the Natural Research Council of Canada. So we're going to be featuring some of their amazing researchers, 4 amazing broadcasts, ocean research, physical modeling, which is today, and 2 on marine plastics, which of course is an issue of interest to a lot of our favorite classroom friends. I really encourage you to check out the whole broadcast series here and check out Ocean Week Canada generally if you want to see over 160 events happening coast to coast to coast. Now, my favorite book of the entire year was called Under a White Sky by Elizabeth Colbert. She's one of the best science writers in the world, and one of the major chapters of that was about physical modeling around ocean and river ecosystems, particularly in the New Orleans area delta, and how the changing world of sea level conditions, increased storm surges, and more are impacting the habitats, ecosystems, and human communities on what makes up at least 1 billion people that live on coastlines around the world. So Scott Baker today is joining us from the NRC to talk about his work using that sort of physical modeling, trying to understand this changing future and these very, very diverse places to understand how we can work to mitigate the effects of climate change, sort of foster a better future for us all, and make sure that we all have places to live, and so do animals, for decades and centuries to come. So without further ado, and with a really beautiful slide deck for us all today, Scott Baker, thank you so much for joining, and welcome to the broadcast, man.
Hi, Jesse. Thanks for having me.
Well, I know you've got a lot to share with us, so let's bring up the presentation. You can dive right in and take us away. Thanks, man.
Great. So yeah, as you mentioned, I'm from the National Research Council in Canada. The National Research Council is a very big organization looking at many different types of science and engineering technology. So I'm just one little piece of the pie of the different cool research that's going on at the NRC. So again, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about coastal resilience through physical modeling. And again, coastal resilience, like Jesse mentioned, trying to make the coastline safer and for in the future, right? We've got a lot of different challenges coming ahead with like sea level rise and climate change. So how can we make sure that our infrastructure and our cities that are at the coasts are going to be safe? So let's step into it. So what is coastal engineering? Coastal engineering is really kind of anything that can be, you think of that, what gets built at the coastline, right? So we've got breakwaters, ports and harbors, all sorts of different structures that are used to, help protect the land. That's a pretty classical one. Another classical one would be, your ports and harbors. So around the world, something like 90% of everything that you've ever bought has probably been on a boat at one point in time. So if it was made overseas and was transported by ship from one place to another, so this could be things like the goods and the clothes that you wear. So like your cell phone or some of the clothes that you've got on right now. It could be your car came from somewhere else around the world, and a lot of places even get their oil and gas from a different country. So a lot of that gets carried by ship. So harbors are extremely important aspects of coastal engineering, and there's a lot of design work that goes involved with those. What else is coastal engineering? Beaches. Beaches are used obviously for recreational purposes. So we like to go swimming and spending time at the coast, but beaches can also act as structures that help protect the land in behind. So if you have only a very small beach versus a very wide beach, they're really going to provide different characteristics. And so building out larger beaches is something that's often done. So here we have a picture of a dredging ship over in the background. So it's sucking up extra sand from the bottom of the ocean and pumping it in onto land as a slurry. And then you've got some construction equipment here trying to build out a nicer beach. So what else is coastal engineering? So in the past, coastal engineering was really involved with mostly building hard structures, right? So we think of like your concrete and rocks in a breakwater. That was really what coastal engineering was about. But nowadays, it's really shifting to think a bit more about using nature to our own advantage, right? So nature has been around for forever, of course, and it has its own ways of protecting the coastline. So things like vegetation on the beach, so not just the sand alone, but having vegetation can drastically change the way that system performs in a storm event. So we want to embrace the way that nature does it and try to recreate that in some of our own construction. And also things like wetlands. Again, in the past, wetlands were often just clear cut because we have a project we want to build here. Let's just knock all this stuff out and put in our infrastructure that we want. But now we're realizing that more and more that's really the wrong way to do it, and we should embrace again the way that nature has done it for millions and millions of years in terms of providing like natural protection through things like wetlands and these seagrasses. And again, another example would be something like a mangrove forest. So this is a special kind of forest. We don't see it too much around North America. This is a special plant that grows more along the equator and a little bit above and a little bit below. So certainly a lot of countries in the world have mangroves or had mangroves in the past. And so again, as coastal engineers, we really want to encourage these natural systems whenever we can to try to have natural function for coastal resilience. But when it comes down to actually building, some projects, sometimes we do need to take a hard approach and actually put in some concrete, put in some rocks, and protect things. So one really interesting mega engineering project that you've maybe probably heard of is the Panama Canal. So the Panama Canal is this very short waterway that connects the Pacific Ocean on the left and the Atlantic Ocean on the right. So it's in that really, if we're looking at the pictures of North and South America there, it's the really skinny part in Panama where you're just connecting the North and South America. And so this is rather than having a ship have to go all the way around the southern tip of South America, which is like a 12,000 kilometer journey that might take you days, engineers 100 years ago now, or even a little more than 100 years ago, started preparing this canal that would be a huge shortcut that would cut right through the middle of the continent and allow ships to go from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean in a very short time span. So it only takes about 12 hours to go through there rather than days and days to go around. So in the middle picture there, we have a picture of one of the locks. So just a huge lock system for very large ships. And then if we look in the bottom left, we can kind of see a little cross-section sketch. So there's a few different locks on the Atlantic side. So the ships will take turns going up and up and up, and then they'll get into a big lake and basically travel across this lake right through the middle of the country. And then at the Pacific side, they'll travel back down through another series of locks, and then they're back in the ocean again. So again, really important project in terms of saving lots and lots of time for transit. So what do I do? So I work for the National Research Council. We have a special research facility called Ocean, Coastal, and River Engineering. So really our job is to look at engineering solutions for very harsh marine environments. So things like ice in covered waters, big waves, cold temperatures, wind affecting things. So lots of different aspects of the marine environment. And so what I do in particular is I use something called physical modeling. So there are other ways to look at this kind of thing. So you can use numerical tools. So numerical modeling uses computer programs to do something similar. But again, what I do is using the physical modeling. So here we see a couple pictures as an example. And I'll go through a few project examples here. So just to say that I think I have pretty much a dream job. I work in a giant facility that has multiple giant wave pools in it. So we can drain the pools, we can build models, and we get to use shovels and skid steer loaders, forklifts, lots of rock and sand, and to build up all these cool structures. And then we fill the pool back up again and we run waves. So if any of you have ever had a chance to go swimming at a wave pool or at the coast, that's basically what we work in, a giant wave pool that's meant specifically for research. So some of the examples of some cool projects that I've worked on over the years. So the first one we're going to look at is a liquefied natural gas platform out in Australia. So many of your homes in North America use natural gas for probably running your furnace, so that gives you your heat, maybe cooking on the stove, and some other ways of using natural gas. So out offshore of Australia, there's a giant field of natural gas that has been found. So it's about 60 kilometers off the shore. And so they have these special platforms and special pumps on the bottom of the ocean that will basically collect that natural gas and pump it all the way back to shore. And then they can distribute that natural gas out to Australia or to other countries nearby so that they can use it to power their homes. So we were looking at the design of this giant liquid gas platform that you see there. So this is kind of a sketch looking through the water to the undersea. So we first had to build a scale model of this unit. So this was a 1 in 50 scale. So it means that what you see there would actually be 50 times bigger in real life. So it gives a good sense of just how big this thing is. So this is just like the lower portion of the platform that actually sits on the ocean floor. And we were looking to see, okay, if a hurricane goes by and starts hitting that structure, what's going to happen? What are the loads? What are the forces on that structure? Is it going to be dangerous for the workers who are on that structure? So this is all the kind of questions that we want to try to answer. And I'll just play here. We have a little movie clip. So it's a few years old, so apologies for the grainy video. But this is showing an example of a really serious hurricane that's coming past the structure and impacting on the structure here. So this would be a really serious storm event coming by and hitting into the side. So we want to measure what's happening. And another aspect of that same project is the pipelines that connect from way offshore all the way back to land. So typically they would place these pipelines on the sea floor. So that's what we see in the left image there. You see the red pipeline, and we have a special system that's dumping rock onto the pipeline to make sure that the pipeline is protected. So again, if a hurricane goes by overhead, the pipeline on the ocean floor could move back and forth, and we obviously don't want that to happen. So we place a protective cover of rock on top. And so in the top right image there, we see this really special ship that gets loaded up with rock, and it has a special tube that can reach all the way down just above the pipeline and drop the rock right where it needs to go on top to protect the pipeline. So again, I'll have a little video here which shows an example of some testing we did in the lab. So here we see some rocks that are moving. So there's waves happening at the surface way up above, and over time the rocks have moved because the rocks weren't big enough, or there wasn't enough of them. And then, oh no, we see the pipeline is moving. So this is obviously the situation we want to avoid. So it's a really good reason why you need to come to the lab and make sure that that this is going to work before you build it in the real world. And so fast forward a few years, and now this project has actually been constructed. So they built the entire lower portion of the structure in a dry dock, and then they put it on this really cool vessel that could carry it way out to sea, and then it could allow the structure to sink down. And then they came and put all the superstructure, so all the extra parts that sit above the water, they built that on top afterwards. And so this platform is now being used to pump natural gas back over to Australia and out to the market. So here's another example of a project in Costa Rica. So this is in kind of Central America. So this was another example. They have a very small port there, or they had a small port there, and they were looking to drastically increase the size of it and put a large new container terminal, similar to one of the pictures that I showed a little bit earlier. So again, they came to us and said, we want to check to make sure that this design is going to work beforehand. So we built, again, a scale model. In this case, the scale model was about 1 in 80 scale. So again, this was a very, very large area. We're looking at, in the top right image there, for our Canadian followers, this is probably representing maybe 2 or 3 kilometers in the long direction, and maybe 1.5 kilometers in the shorter direction. So a pretty big area. And for anyone tuning in from the US, probably about 1.5 miles on the left to right, and maybe a half a mile from top to bottom of that picture. So just a very, very large area. Again, we can see part of the port that we've constructed there. We've got a model ship. We've got some wave generators in the top right section that are making some waves and coming down, and we're observing what happens to that ship. So is the ship moving around too much at the berth? Do we need to maybe extend the breakwater a little bit to provide more protection? So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to study. And again, fast forward a few years, this port is actually now been built and is just getting underway in terms of its operation. So it's really nice to be able to see, the work that we do in the lab get built in the real world. Another really interesting project. So this one is in the Caribbean. So this is a small island, famous for, of course, sitting on the beach. We've got in the top right image there, you can see along the coastline, you've got a resort along the coast. And, I think a new owner took over that resort, and they said, the beach here is kind of small and it's maybe a little bit rough. And if we have families and older people that are coming to enjoy the beach, we want a large beach, of course, lots of sand, lots of place to stretch out. And we want to make it safe for swimming as well. So the engineers said, okay, well, let's try to propose a system here. We'll have some breakwaters to help protect the shore, help hold the sand in place in case there's a storm, and help make it more safe for swimming. So again, in the top right image and on the bottom image, we have some pictures of our physical model that we did. And so we studied many different situations, waves coming from the left or coming from the right, different sizes of waves, and looked at what does the sand do, right? So where does the sand move to? Is it eroding in an area that we don't want it to? Maybe we need to change the size of the breakwater or make it a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, in order to control the way that the sand behaves, so that we have a shoreline that we know what it's probably going to do when a storm happens. So again, we fast forward a few years, and that project has now been built. So we have the resort there, and you can see some breakwaters that are near the coast, and there's 2 other structures those gray structures underwater. So those are some other breakwaters that are submerged, so they stay kind of hidden all the time, so they don't disrupt the view, but they still provide some protection for the shoreline. So another interesting project that we worked on. Another one is called the Living Breakwaters Project. So this one was as a result of Hurricane Sandy from a number of years ago. So this, for some of the younger people in the audience, this might be even before you were born, but this was a very, very severe storm that hit the east coast of the US and it really, really impacted areas like New Jersey, New York. A lot of damage, billions and billions of dollars worth of damage that occurred as a result. And there was one particular location on Staten Island, so not too far from New York City, where there was a section of shoreline that it was just really, really hammered. A lot of flooding happened, a lot of structures that were damaged, and even some loss of life, unfortunately. So this was a project that was kind of derived from as a result of this storm. And so not only do we want to build some breakwaters to help protect the shoreline and try to prevent that from happening again in the future, but not only building a structure, but let's make it a living structure. Let's encourage native flora and fauna, so the different species that like to live in the oceans. We have fish and crustaceans and oysters and different things like that. So let's try to make this breakwater a friendly place for nature to come and enjoy, and provide additional habitat for them. So again, we made some really cool projects. In this case, there was 2 projects. So in the pictures on the left and along the bottom, that was a little bit of a larger study we did where we looked at the stability of the breakwaters. So again, we built them, recreated them in the lab, and then hit them with some big storm waves similar to when the hurricane came by, to make sure that they were going to stay in place, right? We don't want all the rocks to just get completely washed away. And then in the top right image, we have a larger model where we looked at the kind of the whole system. So again, if we go back to the previous slide, we see there was a whole system of breakwaters there, not one long continuous one, but about 10 individual ones. So again, you can see those individual breakwaters that we constructed there. So, how long should they be? How big of a gap should there be between each one? How far from the coastline should they be? So those are all different kinds of questions that the engineers wanted to understand. So we built a model and we were able to investigate all those different things and help provide kind of the optimal solution. And again, this one is now in construction. So they've started building. You can see there in the bottom left, that's the tip of Staten Island. So they've started building a few of those breakwaters, and they're kind of halfway along about now. And this project will be finished, a little bit around this time next year. And another one, this is in Canada on the Great Lakes. So this is in Lake Ontario, very close to Toronto. Mississauga, actually, if you're not too far away. So this is called the Lakeview Conservation Area. At one time, you can see there was a wastewater treatment facility pretty close to the land, and there wasn't really anywhere that the public could walk along in front of the shoreline there, and it was not really that enjoyable of a place. So a concept came up, and they said, let's try to build and recreate a natural wetland in this area, not only to provide, again, protection for the land in behind, but also to make a nice natural park and more of an ecological area. So the image on the right there is kind of an artist's concept of what that was going to look like. And way in the distance there, you can kind of see the CN Tower. That's that tiny little tower off in the distance in the right image. So just down the coast from Toronto. So again, we constructed a very large model looking at the different configurations for what this thing might look like, testing out all the different concepts to try to, again, provide the most optimal solution and make sure that the design, when they build it, it's going to last. And imagining in the future, okay, well, what happens if a big storm happens on Lake Ontario? Is it going to survive? So those are the kinds of things that we wanted to look at. And again, I'm happy to report that this project is now getting quite well underway. A lot of the construction is happening, and this one will actually even be open for public access. So you'll be able to go to this site and go for a really nice nature walk along the shoreline of Lake Ontario in hopefully 2 years from now. So just a couple final remarks here. Physical modeling is a really important tool in coastal engineering. It's not the only tool, so it's really important to do a lot of desk work to do some preliminary analysis. There's a lot of math that goes and science and design work that goes into even coming up with the concepts. And there's a lot of numerical modeling, again, using computers to try to predict what's going to happen. And so physical modeling is a great way to kind of cap it all off and really make sure that before you go to build it, we're going to test it and make sure that it's really going to perform well. So it's really challenging work, but very, very interesting and really rewarding to get to see, projects that were in the lab now being implemented in the future. And, I hope to get to visit some of these sites myself sometime in the future. So thank you very much. And if you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer.
Well, thank you so much, Scott, and for leaving your email up too. So if people have additional queries after the broadcast, they can reach out with that. If you want to come out of screen share, see us again, have a bit of a conversation. We've got our live class with Trend Pleasures group. We got a bunch of YouTube groups. We've been getting some questions via email, which is great. So, so excited to dive in. At the very beginning, you highlighted this sort of taking sand from under the water, helping reinforce the beach with that. One of the things that we've actually heard in some of our past broadcasts on oceans and coasts is the idea that sand has become sort of a weird commodity in the world where people are taking it from places and putting it in other places. Can you speak to this broadly speaking? Because yours is a very positive take. Hey, we're taking this from the seafloor. We're using it to help reinforce the beach. Are there any downsides to this that you've seen in any of your work or on a global scale?
Yeah, so it's interesting. You would think that sand would not be much of a commodity, right? Especially in places like the Middle East. There's many projects going on there, and they have a big time lack of sand. So, and you would think that's really strange. They have deserts right there. Can't you just take the sand from the desert and go dump it in the water? But it's not so easy, because the sand that comes from the desert is a little bit different than the sand that you would naturally find at the coast. The sand from the deserts is typically it's changed over time. It used to be rock, and then it's changed to sand, and through a weathering process. But that's mainly by the wind and kind of rubbing up against each other. Whereas in the water, it's really the rock that's been broken down to sand. It's really broken down because of this wave action and kind of material rubbing against each other. So although they're both sand, they have different properties and they behave a little bit differently. So if you just take that desert sand and drop it in the water, it won't perform the same way that kind of natural sand does. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned the Middle East as an example. I mean, literally, I couldn't have a more salient one than that. Scott, we got this question online on YouTube. Sorry, joking, frog in my throat. The pool that you've highlighted, or the series of pools, how big are these? I mean, we get sort of a sense in some of the pictures of you versus them. Is there a amount of water? Is there any reference we can, or due to like an Olympic swimming pool or something like that?
We're getting up there towards like an Olympic swimming pool, and it kind of depends, because a lot of our water, we typically drain the basins when we do our construction, and then we only fill it up as much as we need. But I guess as a point, one of our basins has about 3 million liters. So wow. If this is, a liter of water, it's about 3 million of those that it can hold. So, quite a few. Yeah, stack them all up individually. Yeah.
Very cool. Thanks, Scott. We're going to head to Mr. and Pleasure's class. So these are our help environmental leaders. And I've got to tell you, there's like no class that has done more in like conservation and education here like all year for us. So it's always a thrill to have them back. If you guys want to unmute your mic, turn on cameras, you're in the broadcast. You can just flick it on and you're good to go there, Mr. and Pleasure. Hey.
There we go. Does that work?
You're perfect. Yeah.
Right on. Sorry if you can hear our fire alarms going. We've just had a deer. An eastern slider is making a nest and some other things going on. So it's a little bit busy here. So if you hear weird noises, that's okay.
It's perfect.
Yeah, go ahead. No, you can ask your questions. All right. Yeah.
So hi, I'm Soraya, and are there any ways that you can integrate natural restoration in your buildings?
So like in the models itself that we do, it is tough, because often what we do has to be done at scale, right? So if we're looking at a huge length of shoreline, if you have to fit it all into our building, you have to kind of scale it down. And it can be really difficult to scale down the properties of like nature, right? So if we think like shrubs and plants that might be growing at the coastline, whereas taking like the rocks or the sand at the coastline, that's not as difficult to scale down. Now there are ways to do it, and we do have a few special facilities. I didn't really show them too much here in my little presentation, but we do have some facilities where we can do a 1-to-1 scale, so like real world scale testing. So in that case, we have done some experiments where we took actual sea grasses and plants that naturally grow at the ocean, and we put them in our facility, and we see how well do they perform, how well can they attenuate or shrink down the waves. So if the waves are coming in from offshore, they go through the plants, and the plants by their own motion, they'll help to kind of eat up the wave, and then by the time the wave gets through the patch of grass, it's much smaller. So we did some studies to try to investigate that in the lab.
We've done a lot of programs with people that specifically talk about mangroves and their impact in mitigating storms. And it's really quite incredible how much better nature is than pretty much anything that we can do. And much cheaper too, to like plant a forest or do something like you were highlighting Lake Ontario. I've been to Marie Curtis Park right beside that. And the thought that that's going to turn into something really special like that is
cool. So just one of your points there. So nature is great, but the one problem is nature takes up a lot of space to do what they need to do. Right. So if we want to use nature, we have to be willing to accept that maybe my resort might not be as close to the edge of the water as I wanted it to be, right? So we have to be we can't be so guilty that we want to be right at the coastline.
I think that if anything, this generation of students coming up is very willing to have the resort be a little bit back and have a nice natural wetland there. And that's been a huge change in public perception and the way people think about things in the last 20 years. That's been really exciting to see as someone involved in the field of seeing how speakers talk about it, how students address it. So there you go.
It's a lot safer too. A lot safer to be further back from the water, right? Yeah.
The society that our students want, you can make that come to fruition. It's been interesting to see how coastlines have been affected by major storms in the last years, even in Canada for our Canadian classrooms today. Yep. Look at PEI, look at Port aux Basques in Newfoundland, which is where I am now, in the latest major hurricane, and it's devastating. And so the prospect of rebuilding these places in a way that is good for wildlife and people and sort of has a built-in buffer for 100 years is really enticing. It's exciting to see. It's why your work is so important. I'll stop talking because we've got like a gazillion questions from Miss Dillon's class. And Miss Dillon's been joining us not only all year, but like all day. So Farmington, Missouri, welcome back in. So many questions. Okay, Caden wants to know, how do you know how strong the water is when you build it for these storms? How do you collect data? What tools measurement do you use? You're showing this pool with the oil rig set up, and this is a big storm. How are you taking a pool and sort of applying it to an ocean? How does that work?
Right. Yeah. So some great questions. So before you even come to the lab, there's a ton of information that needs to be collected. So typically, maybe you've probably heard of like a wave buoy. So way out in the ocean, they have hundreds and hundreds of these that can be scattered all around the world, typically all around the coastlines of the world. Some areas of the world maybe don't have as many, and some other places they have there are tons and tons of them. So some of these buoys have been out there for 20, even 50 years collecting data. And so, it's very important to have that historical data to know, okay, we know that these kinds of storms come around, every 5 years or every 10 years. And what are the size of the waves that happened at that time? And then so we'll get that data provided to us, and they'll say, okay, well, it was say a 3-meter wave or a 10-foot wave for our American friends. And then we'll recreate that again at model scale in the lab. So we'll use our wave machine and we'll, carefully set it up so that we can recreate that exact storm event if that's what we want to do, or any storm event. So a bigger one, a smaller one, or a specific event. So we have special wave probes, which are basically like that wave buoy out in the ocean. We have special probes that we put in the water on a tripod, and then we can put those all around the basin in different places and measure what is the wave height at different areas. So lots of different sensors.
I'm going to follow up with a question that I had as you were doing your presentation. It ties into all this. So something like Hurricane Katrina happens. Do you recreate that, and see how it actually impacted the actual ecosystem, levees, what have you, and recreate that to get sort of a baseline to go, okay, our models are more correct going forward because we've done like a test case scenario? How do you calibrate? That's the word I'm looking for. All of this.
Yeah, so you may actually recreate a specific event. Now, for something like Hurricane Katrina, again, for us to recreate it, we can only look at small portions of the shoreline at a time. Right. It would be kind of impossible to look at how that hurricane, interacted with a huge length of shoreline, right? So multiple states, a couple hundred miles or a couple hundred kilometers. So in that case, numerical modeling may be the tool of choice to try to understand more what happened over the whole length of coastline. So it really depends what it is that you're trying to learn. So you would probably need both, depending on what it is you're doing.
Fantastic, Scott. I'm going to head to YouTube for one more Mystery and Pleasures class. I'll come to you in a second. If you want to unmute your mic, I'll know you're good to go when I do come. We have some other email questions too. There's so many questions from so many angles, Scott. They just keep coming. Okay. Lincoln wants to know, in Ms. Dillon's class, what's the most difficult problem you've dealt with? Is there any particular project you worked on that was like the most challenging that you can speak to?
I think probably the first one there with the ocean, the oil rig out in the ocean, or the natural gas platform out in the ocean. That one was really, really complex. There was a lot of different parts to fabricate that one. We had something like 100 different sensors on that structure. So there was just really, really complex, a lot of different things to think about when we were building our physical model. But it was really rewarding afterwards to know that, we got a lot of really great data out of it, and they were able to use that data to design it and make sure that it's going to be safe for the people that are working on it.
Yep, great answer, man. Environmental leaders, I'm heading back to you. Come on in. Hey.
Okay. Hello, my name is Sanya, and this one is more of a personal question. I was wondering what were the factors that led you to pursue coastal engineering?
Cool question.
Great question. Yeah. So I think I always knew I wanted to be an engineer of some kind. I always loved Lego growing up. I have Lego in my office. I have lots of Lego at home. So building and constructing things was always kind of in my blood, I guess. So when I went into university, I said, okay, well, I'll do civil engineering and kind of see where that takes me. And I thought I wanted to do structural engineering, so building bridges or tall buildings, something like that. But it was only when I got to doing my master's, and a new professor came to the university, and he called me up one day and said, "Hey, I'm looking for new students. I want to study coastal engineering." And I had no experience. I had no idea what a coastal engineer was at the time. I live in Ottawa, and just to give you a perspective, it's kind of like the middle of Canada. I'm a couple hours drive from any ocean, so it's kind of a little bit strange to be thinking about coastal engineering here in Ottawa. But we have this really unique lab here in Ottawa. And it sounded like a really interesting field of study. And I said, what's this all about? So I had about a half an hour conversation on the phone with him, and I was hooked. It sounded really, really interesting. Waves and a changing environment, and trying to deal with things that are just so different than a standard, putting up a standard big box store or something like that. It sounded really, really interesting. So I got hooked on it after that. So.
Very cool. It's quite amazing. Two things, actually. Every time we have an engineer, without fail, they loved Lego when they were a kid, which is fantastic. And two is just, again, the serendipity of I'm interested in a topic, and then hearing from someone who's an expert who introduces you to a sort of niche field within that is such a common story, whether it's engineers, astronomers, cave divers. If you seek out cool people doing cool things, you'll be amazed what actually speaks to you. And I think that's one of the best pieces of advice for any of our students, is that a diversity of knowledge and a seeking out of a diversity of things and opinions and ideas will invariably lead you to passions that you never would have found in any other context. So I'm really glad we got. Thanks, Sonia, for the great question. Scott, I noticed something the moment you said Lego globe, which I didn't know was the Lego globe, and that's amazing. You have all these little versions of things that I've seen on Big Coast before, particularly in China. I've seen pictures of them. Could you grab one of those and explain why they're that shape?
I have a few here, right.
Why are they that shape? What's the deal with this for people that might see these on coastlines?
Right. So I guess the first thing that, when the first engineers started to think, okay, let's build a breakwater, we're going back to Roman times, right? Hundreds and thousands, or not hundreds of thousands, but hundreds and hundreds of years ago, they said, okay, well, let's put some rocks in the water. We know that those rocks will survive, and we can provide a harbor in behind, and it will protect our coastline. Well, the Romans, they did a pretty good job, and for the most part in the Mediterranean, there wasn't really, really big storms, so those rocks worked. But there's other places in the world, they said, okay, let's try to build a rock breakwater, and then they found that some of the waves were just huge. And if you do the math and you figure out, okay, well, I would need a rock that's 15 tons or 30 tons to be stable in that environment. Well, there's not too many places in the world that you can get a 30-ton rock. So the engineer said, okay, well, why don't we artificially create one, right? So the first thing they did was just make a big cube of concrete, right? So you would just imagine this is 50 times bigger, right? Just a gargantuan, huge piece of concrete, and just a simple cube, or maybe a slightly more complex shape, as you see here. So that was one of the first designs. This was maybe back in the mid 1900s, and they started placing some of those structures out there. And then they said, okay, well, that's working pretty good, but it's using a lot of concrete. Is there some way we can do this a bit better, right? If you just have these stacked on each other, they don't really interlock with each other, right? So think of your Lego where the pieces actually click together. So then they said, okay, well, why don't we try a different design? So this one's called a tetrapod. So it's got 4 legs, each one the same size. And you can imagine that the next unit is just going to kind of come and hook in a little bit. So although they don't physically grab onto each other, they do kind of hook a little bit. And so when you place these, you can use much smaller ones, but the fact that they kind of hook together, it enables them to kind of act as a nice armoring layer. And again, over the years, they've been, trying to refine this more and more. So here's a different one. This one's called a core lock unit. So it's kind of like an H with a little bar sticking out from it. And again, it's same idea. They're just getting even more better at interlocking with each other. So think again, when these are all placed together on a breakwater, it forms this armor that's almost like a, connecting a whole block of Legos together in order to protect the shoreline. So many different concepts have been we've come up with over the years.
Super cool, Scott. Thank you for the detailed answer, man. We've gotten like this bevy of really great questions, and unfortunately, we only have time for about 2 of them. So good problem to have. I have passed along your email again in the private chat for folks that want to reach out and ask additional ones. I knew you environmental leaders would do this, and Ms. Dillon's class too. Okay, I'm going to take one from each group, and then we'll wrap up from there. This has been a perfect start, and again, his email's in that slide if you want to follow up with more that I can't take live. Let's see. Okay. You know what, environmental leaders, I'm going to share this one on behalf of you. I know you have 3, but I really, really like this one. So they want to know, are you aware of any projects similar to yours that are modeling river systems and wetlands in Ontario? And a bit of the context here is that this crew does so much incredible work, the Westminster Ponds ecosystem in London, just in general with getting excited and sharing knowledge about wetland ecosystems. So anything you can highlight in Ontario?
Right. So again, a lot of the work that we do is typically more at the coast. We do some work with rivers in our basins, but again, rivers are really, really long. So it's hard to make everything small enough to fit inside of our model. So for rivers, a little bit more of that work tends to get done by numerical modeling, so on the computer. So actually some of my colleagues, even here in the building, that's what they specialize in, is like flooding along rivers and waterways. And in fact, there is probably some work being done in Ontario, even here in my building, but there'd be other consultants and around around Canada who would be working on many different projects in Ontario specifically.
Spectacular. Well, I will say, don't get me wrong, numerical modeling super cool, but your work is cooler. The giant getting to play with a giant facility is very cool. It's like, what am I going to do for work today? Create a hurricane. What fun! I love this question from Miss Dillon's class. You guys have a few great ones too. Okay, they really want to know. They have 8 students in the class that think that your favorite subject in school was science, and 11 that think it was math. Was it either of those, or was it something entirely different that you want to blow our minds with?
Well, I think I'd have to say probably physics. So that's a kind of a combination of the two, right? So probably like the grade 11 physics class that I took was probably the thing that really put me on to science and engineering. That was probably one of the key classes where you really start to understand, even just your car driving down the road. When you're a kid, you don't really think much of it, but then when you take a physics class or something, you really start to understand it a little bit more and understand some of the math that's happening in behind. And so I think that really tweaked something to really focus on engineering from that point forward.
Yeah. I love it's funny that one of the first people in one of these broadcasts to answer with a science answer in a long time. We've had a lot of folks highlighting art lately, theater, music. Okay. And what I find that's really fascinating about this is that I think, when I grew up, I always assumed that scientists like you, explorers, were it was biology, it was physics, it was chemistry. That was it. There was nothing else. Yeah. And increasingly, we're seeing these very different backgrounds and approaches leading to some really diverse ideas and opinions in the sciences. So if you're keen on anything right now and you want to end up in a cool career like Scott's, don't let your lack of necessary passion or skill at any particular thing hold you back from that. We had a person on today, earlier, our first program of the day for Oceans Week, was a corporate executive in New York who'd never been scuba diving, and now she's leading a scuba expedition all around the world. So it really, there's a whole life ahead of you, whether you're in grade 10 or grade 3 or grade 6. We've got classes from all our groups today. But I'm really glad you managed to blend science and math so beautifully in grade 11.
And if I could just add real quick, again, going back, coastal engineering, again, was really just about the engineering, right? So go back 50 years, they really just cared about, I'm putting a hard structure in the water and we're going to protect that shoreline, or we're going to protect that harbor. But nowadays, we really have to think more about the whole package. It's not just the engineering, not just the building that hard structure, but what do we think about the natural environment? What, is this a spawning ground for different species? What is the native plants that grow in this area? How can we incorporate those into our project? So it's not only the engineering that maybe is my specialty, but we have to work with the biologists and the marine scientists. Really, it's all about coming together to understand the problem in a more wholesome way.
I think everyone assumed my generation would be the one that was really going to take the charge on changing the world, doing great, and wasn't. We did okay.
Yeah.
But kids these days are like just killing it. Like the whole sort of way of thinking about the world has shifted so much in the last 20 years. It's astonishing. And so whenever there's a tendency to be pessimistic or feel doom and gloom about the way the environment's being treated, I always take such hope in the fact that like 20 years ago, no one was thinking that way. And now everybody is thinking that way. And that is astonishing on how quickly that has transitioned. So Scott, this is such a fun presentation, man. I know we could go all day. Classes, please do email Scott after the broadcast. We like to inundate all our speakers with additional emails at the end. So Scott set you up beautifully for that. Check out nrc.canada.ca for more on the National Research Council. Check out our Ocean Week series of broadcasts, 3 more all at 1 Eastern, so you can check those out. And this, like all our other programs, is on our YouTube channel as well, a big part of Ocean Week Canada. Scott, I'm going to bring in our environmental leaders. They've got their camera off, but they can join me in saying a big thank you and farewell. Miss Tramp class, thank you guys in the background. Miss Dylan, all our other YouTube classes, thank you so much, everyone. Bye for now, guys. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.